September of 1999 saw the arrival of Vince Russo in WCW after Eric Bischoff was relieved of his duties. Vince Russo, wrongfully, was seen as the man that brought much success to the WWF, and his creative mind could really be the saviour WCW needed as they were getting destroyed by Vince McMahon in the ratings. To put things short, Vince Russo's initial WCW run as head writer was a failure. Russo's style of crash TV just didn't catch on in WCW, as he put more emphasis on characters and not on the actual in-ring wrestling. Give the dog his due though, he did try to put a bigger spotlight on mid-carders who would never have got a sniff during the Bischoff era. Russo was also responsible for pushing the Revolution faction during this time period, which I thought was pretty good. Russo had also came up with the NWO 2000 idea with the intention of pushing Jeff Jarrett and Bret Hart. When both men got injured, Russo had to change plans in January of 2000. Apparently a meeting was held and Russo suggested that Tank Abbott would become the new champion after knocking out Sid Vicious with just one punch. The day after this was suggested, Vince was asked to step down from his head writer role and instead become a standard member of the booking committee. Clearly the folks at WCW didn't think too much of his recent ideas, and the Tank Abbott suggestion was the icing on the cake. Russo refused to become a committee member, stating he was hired to be a head writer, and he then left WCW. WCW opted to bring Vince Russo back along with Eric Bischoff in April of 2000, hoping that the duo might re-spark some fan interest in WCW. The idea was that Russo and Bischoff would completely reboot WCW into a more modern, streamlined company that would also allow young talent to get a break. This was in response to the huge success WWE had at creating new young stars during this era. It seemed like a knee-jerk reaction for sure, but WCW was trying absolutely anything to stay afloat during this time period. Billed as the night the world would change, Bischoff and Russo took over WCW and the reboot happened in quite an extreme fashion. Wanting to literally start all over again from scratch, Russo and Bischoff declared that all WCW titles were to be vacated on April 10th, 2000. Also on this night, Russo and Bischoff announced a new stable, the New Blood. For the longest time, WCW had a perception that only older and more established stars could get over in the main event. The answer to this was the New Blood, a faction mainly consisting of younger stars and some established wrestlers who never really got a good shot in WCW. That being said, Goldberg and Bret Hart were written in as New Blood members, so yeah, who knows what was going on there. In opposition to the New Blood was the Millionaires Club, a group of older veterans who the New Blood perceived to have taken opportunities away from young stars. Initially, the plan was for the New Blood to be led by Vince Russo and the Millionaires Club would be led by Eric Bischoff, but of course this was WCW. Almost immediately plans changed and Russo and Bischoff joined forces instead. Notable initial members of the New Blood faction were Rey Mysterio Jr., Vampiro, Billy Kidman, Mike Awesome, Booker T, Shane Douglas, Goldberg, Bam Bam Bigelow, Disco Inferno, Juventud Guerrera and, wait for it, David Arquette. Meanwhile, over on the Millionaires Club, we had the likes of Ric Flair, DDP, Sting, Kurt Hennig, Hulk Hogan, Randy Savage and Lex Luger. Obviously, you'd think that the plan going into this would be the New Blood would be the fan favourites. After all, these guys had been held down by veterans and they were now here to show how good they could really be, just give them a chance. The problem was, those who were still tuning into WCW TV shows and attending WCW events were, at this point, loyal to the product. You would really have to be a pretty hardcore WCW fan to want to pay money to go to a WCW show in the year 2000. What this means was that fans just liked the veterans. They wanted to cheer the likes of Sting, Ric Flair, Diamond Dallas Page. In quite a short time, the New Blood were booked as heels, while the Millionaires Club was booked as baby faces, which seemed like the total opposite of what should have been done, but anyway, WCW, eh? This reboot of WCW seemed to be more targeted to the internet wrestling audience, the fans who liked reading dirt sheets and gaining insider information, the smart mark fans. Russo and Bischoff wrote shoot scripts for characters and themselves and booked things in such a fashion that they totally expected smart internet fans to react. The problem here is that while a smart fan may find a smidge of humour in this and maybe get entertained for a brief second, the wider audience had no idea what the hell people were talking about. So for example, Sid Vicious once attacked Arn Anderson with a pair of scissors in a hotel brawl. So Bischoff, when demanding Sid hand over the world title, taunted him by saying, "Where's your scissors? Where's your scissors?" Shit like this. So if you had no idea about the Arn Anderson incident, you'd be like, why the fuck is this guy talking about scissors? Back to the New Blood and the WCW reboot. Spring Stampede was set to air just 6 days after the reboot, and all the vacated titles were on the line. The format of the show is strange, featuring 2 complete tournaments for the tag and US belts, the finals of the World Heavyweight title tournament, and also matches for the vacant hardcore and cruiserweight titles, resulting in 14 matches total. It was a clean sweep for the New Blood, who picked up every belt with the exception of the hardcore title. That belt was won by Terry Funk. So Chris Candido won the cruiserweight title, who at this point we could consider a veteran, but certainly someone who hasn't had a proper shot in WCW. So this falls into the New Blood's mantra and purpose. On the flip side of this, New Blood members Shane Douglas and Buff Bagwell won the tag titles, Scott Steiner picked up the US title after getting help from New Blood member Vampiro, and the chosen one, Jeff Jarrett, was crowned the new WCW champion. Does Shane Douglas, Buff Bagwell, Scott Steiner and Jeff Jarrett really sound like a revolution in young guys getting a break in WCW? Two of the most well-known feuds during this era, and I use the term well-known lightly, would be Sting vs Vampiro and Hulk Hogan vs Billy Kidman. Looking at the Hogan feud, the Hulkster once said that Billy Kidman couldn't draw fleas to a flea market. Kidman confronted Hogan about these comments, which subsequently led to Kidman defeating Hogan 3 times in a row. Obviously not cleanly, but hey, 3 wins against Hogan. Vampiro had previously formed an alliance with Sting as the Brothers in Paint. No shit. After the events at Spring Stampede though, the pair feuded throughout the spring season, with Sting getting the upper hand in nearly all their matches. This set up the Human Torch match, in which Vampiro won by setting Sting on fire. It took just nearly a month after Spring Stampede for the New Blood group to completely disband in yet another knee-jerk reaction. The reasons given was that the angle wasn't working because fans instead cheered for the Millionaires Club, and so the plug was pulled in literally no time at all. What did Russo and Bischoff expect here though? It's no wonder fans didn't care much for the New Blood. As we touched on earlier, the people still tuning into WCW shows and attending WCW events were faithful to WCW, for better or for worse, and they wanted to cheer veterans like Hulk Hogan, Ric Flair and Sting. When the whole show was revolving around one massive storyline and the New Blood kept getting the upper hand in some cases, it just didn't work. It may have worked 4 years prior with the NWO, but certainly not this time in the year 2000. The angle completely ended at Bash at the Beach that year in Daytona, Florida, after the infamous Russo shoot promo, which caused Hogan and Bischoff to leave WCW. There was a pay-per-view afterwards named New Blood Rising in August of 2000, but the storyline itself was already long dead. Maybe this pay-per-view name was penned in during the angle and couldn't be changed after the storyline faded out, but yeah, bad times for WCW. 2 months after the New Blood Rising pay-per-view, Russo's time in WCW came to a halt after suffering a bad concussion when Goldberg speared him through a cage. Following Russo's departure, creative was handled by a booking committee which included John Laurinaitis and Terry Taylor, but the damage was already done. The WCW reboot and the New Blood seemed like the final last-ditch effort put together by Bischoff and Russo to save the company. But it was unfortunately a failure.